And
we're live.
Yes.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to see all these amazing people working for peace and investing in peace. Sorry for the slight technical issues this evening, but I'm really grateful for Stephen Hinton for having this vision and starting a new venture to invest in peace, but also his colleagues Tim and Ramesh, who will share about their work on how they are working in practically investing in peace and creating a fund for investing in peace. This webinar is a series of different webinars we have been doing with trust and integrity in the global economy, which has been a conference in our Swiss center, the Center of Initiative of Change, but also we have been running other programs and workshops on building trust and integrity, and we are realizing more and more that for the world to continue to function, we need more practical ways of building trust between our social systems and our ecological systems. And today, the dysfunction we are seeing in the world is that there is almost no connection between the ecological systems and social systems. Namely the financial system, namely the economic system, and I hope that in some very concrete and practical ways we can start relating again to the fact that investing in land, restoring ecological systems will create jobs, will restore peace, and create food for all. So thanks, Stephen, and over to you.
Yeah, thanks. You know, my starting point is always that when I've been involved in business, and I have been almost all my life, people have been telling me the business of business is business. I'm sure we've all heard this. And I just accepted this a long time. And I started to think about it. Now, wait a minute, what is the business of business? What is important to me? Because I think what's really, really important to me, what's deepest important to me, really should be the business of business, if that's what we believe we should be doing. We spend 1,600 hours a year at work, and we have energy for about another 400 for to be involved in our communities. It's a lot of our time. So as Rishabh said, I've been thinking about this and asked Rishabh to cooperate around this whole idea of maybe we should be investing in things that are a bit more important to us. And just to have this discussion, I started off as a science teacher and environmentally involved, and then started working as a management consultant, and then went through to work with large projects at Ericsson. And then leaving Ericsson, I started to get involved in sustainability, was a managing director of a water company, and have been involved with sustainability projects since then, including helping the Swiss government look at environmental taxes as a way of not only keeping the environment okay, but also keeping people okay. And I've just been coming to this point now that I've been thinking, isn't it time that we really focus on what's really important? And that really the purpose of this webinar is just to kick the whole thing off, have this discussion. If we believe that peace is most important to us, how can we invest in it? How can we do this? And so what I've done is I've invited Ramesh, who's an expert in land restoration, and Tim, who's an expert in finance, to explore different aspects of this. What I'd like to do, of course, is just to kick off a little bit with really my own perspective of this. You've got to remember that my own story and initiatives of change really go back a long way. I was born just after the war. I was born into a society where my village was full of holes from bombs. All my parents' generation had fought in the war, and my grandparents had fought in the First World War. And it was obvious for my generation growing up that peace isn't just the absence of war. We haven't cracked it. like not warring with each other anymore is not really the highest point, if you like to use a business phrase, the high point of the human project. There's something else. And what I'd like to say is that peace isn't the absence of war, but it's the harmony that comes from within each human being. We can't describe it, but we know what it is. We need to give it a chance. And one of the things I've been thinking about very much when it comes to what's the business of business is to do a little experiment in the morning on the underground. If you go to work on the underground or the bus, you turn around to someone and say, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm going to work." They say, "Why are you going to work?" "Well, I have to." "Well, why do you have to?" "Well, if I don't go to work, I won't get the money." "Okay, well, why do you need the money?" "Well, if I don't get the money, I won't be able to put food on the table and a roof over the head for my family and everything." And then you say to them, "But wait a minute, if you could put food on the table and a roof over the head another way, would you go to work?" "No, we wouldn't." So, well, 80% say we wouldn't. There's 10% that say, "Yeah, of course I would, because I'm doing something I feel is important." But this is the point, and a lot of business, you know, when you deal with business, you talk to people about what's your vision, what's your mission, you know, what's your business all about. And business people will say, "Well, I make widgets, and my vision is a world connected with very, very good widgets." But actually, when you ask their employees about the whole thing, it's really putting food on the table and a roof over the head. But that's not all of it, really, because the other part of it is that is just an enabler. That helps us because we all need that, but we also all need peace as well. So it's like, how do all these things hang together? So what I'd like to talk about, or put it, or open the discussion is to say, look, the business of business is peace and prosperity for everyone. And how can we get in our work and in our daily lives and in what we buy and even in what we do, how can we bring that and contribute to that peace and prosperity for all? Now, I'd like to show you something I've been given by the Stockholm Environmental Institute, who I've been working quite closely with. I'm going to share my screen here. And this is like, if you like, creating a house for humanity, creating a house that gives a peaceful and prosperous place to live. I hope you can see it all, but I'll describe it as we go along. The roof is that we must keep within planetary boundaries. We must respect the ecosystem and not go above it. And there are 9 planetary boundaries they talk about, and a couple of them we're on our way to really exceeding. So we need to be very careful. We need to learn how to live in a good, prosperous way, but within those planetary boundaries. But the foundation of a house for humanity is really a personal peace. Is understanding why we're here. We're starting to realize, and it was something that I think we realized, my generation after the war, like the hippie generation, it's like you can't consume yourself happy. This happiness comes from somewhere else. It was something that I think our generation really started to understand, looking at what all of our parents had been through, remembering that most of our parents' generation are quite traumatized by what had happened. The next part of the foundation is land and soil fertility. We need that security of water and food, and we can't get that unless our land and our soil are giving it to us. If we can get the food and water security, then we can create housing security. So we have a house for self, and we can bring in everyone else and have an inclusion. So this, if you like, is the vision of a prosperous house for humanity, just the basics. Now, what I wanted to talk about is about capital. Rishabh asked me to talk about this because if you're going to talk about business, you talk about the vision of what you're trying to do, you're going to talk about the bits or the components of what you're trying to build. One should also talk about capital. And most people think of capital as being money, and of course that's the way the word is used. But actually, a lot of accounting firms and a lot of people thinking of business are saying that capital is something that's used, and it's used to produce a product or service, but itself is not consumed. Oh yeah, I'm sharing my screen. I was just going to say, if you've got your microphone on, if you could turn it off while I'm sharing my screen, because if you make a noise, my screen will go away. It's not that I've got a lot of detailed slides here, but so what I wanted to say was there are 4 kinds of capital that we need to be investing in. And just very briefly, they're built capital, which is like our houses. There's also our tools, our cars, our roads. It's human capital, and that's what we know how to do. And here, of course, we're talking about knowing how to keep within planetary boundaries. Social capital, which is our organizations, which is creating organizations which do that. And, of course, the natural capital, which is soil, but it's also our air, and it's also the minerals that we have, etc., and the water and the hydrology of what we've got. What's interesting from the diagram here is that the different forms of capital are used to create themselves. So, for example, if I know how to build a house, I can go to friends of mine. I can go to a local association maybe, or a local group who want to build houses. I grab natural capital. I get some wood from the forest, and I build a house. So these are all connected with each other. And so really the question is, if this is our capital, what are those green lines in the diagram? It's about formalizing those transactions that take place between us in order to create these different kinds of capital. And this is what I want to throw out there. That's maybe the role of the financial system. What's the role of the financial system if we were to create this kind of capital? That will create, if you like, safe house for humanity. So I just want to say that it's happening now. It really is all happening now. And I want to talk about the ladder. This came up when we were working with the Water and Food Award. We saw that corporations and other organizations are starting to get on the ladder. At the bottom of the ladder, it's as an individual, work on personal peace. It's as an organization, it's to sign a peace declaration of some kind, to join an initiative, to join a charter, just to say, yeah, this is what we want to do, talk about that. The next level, of course, is helping out with different kinds of education. We have non-violent communication. We have, as Initiative Change have done a lot after the war, they worked a lot with reconciliation, and still do, conflict resolution, and even personal peace education. One could offer this to one's employees, key stakeholders, or whatever. The next step is corporate social responsibility, participating in peace projects, corporate social responsibility in other ways, maybe even in direct investment. And then, of course, getting involved in other kinds of projects like land restoration and food security, education, and everything like that. And maybe even developing a service that directly promotes peace in some way. Now, this is happening. I've got some good examples here. This is a peace education program. And as you can see here, it's been done in local adult education places. It's also been done in prisons. It's a series of videos. It's been translated into many languages. People who go on it feel a lot of benefit. It helps them reorient themselves to what it is to be part of this wonderful human project. Going up the ladder, there are organizations that actually do peace projects and peace products. This Smart Eyes is a Swedish company. It does look for peace glasses. If you buy a pair of spectacles, then it donates to a peace organization for every one they sell. So I mean, this ladder we can go up. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is about all the conflicts that are happening. We haven't solved peace. This is from Aviation Week, and this is where all the conflicts are. What's very interesting, the worst ones are the red, and then you've got the yellow, and then the blue. The thing about this, if you look at this map, and then you take another map, which is the map of soil degradation. It might be difficult to see, but on here, the black areas is where the worst degradation is. If you superimpose the areas of conflict on one and the soil degradation on the other, you start to see something that's very interesting, and that's a lot of places where soil degradation is high. You've got a lot of conflicts, and so I'm a greenie. I'm an environmental guy. I won't, you know, say that I'm not, but where the group in the world who I really feel I'm talking the same language to is the military, people working with professional security, dealing with security risk. We're talking the same language because taking care of our Earth is a way of creating a place for us to live in creating the conditions for peace. So, having said that, I'd like to bring in Ramis. I'd like to ask you about your experience in, is it possible to restore land? And if we could, can we do it for everyone? And then I want to bring in Tim to talk about, can we use money, in fact, to do something with that? So with that, I'll thank you all for joining, and thank Ramis for inviting me, and I'll just mute and hand over to Ramis.
Guess it's time for me to unmute. First of all, greetings everyone. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the invitation. And I think the question that's been presented as to whether or not it is in fact possible for this this venture to be seen as being sort of a viable business possibility. Is this something that is actually physically possible? Is this something that's worth doing? Well, I'll say yes to all of those, in addition to a number of other, I think a number of other questions that are sort of corollaries or connected to that. And for me, I honestly don't see us, sort of humanity, us as a species, having a future if we don't take up this activity, because what is fast becoming made very apparent, actually very obvious, is that, you know, we have more and more people on the planet that are relying on smaller and smaller pools of physical capital to meet their needs, and that eventually, you know, we get to the point where this propensity to enter into conflicts for dwindling resources will be happening more frequently. And the unfortunate thing about the human being, as we can see from history, is that we do have a tendency to get violent when you know, when we're presented with desperate situations that put us in dire straits. The problem with doing the problem with this propensity at this point is that our big brains have allowed us to be able to develop technologies that are highly destructive, and that have allowed us to, at this point, to actually present us with the possibility, the very real possibility, of eradicating ourselves. in the course of trying to meet our basic needs, and most notably food and water. And then actually on the backs of food and water, we also have environmental security, which is now becoming a very real problem. So this is something that isn't without precedent in terms of historically. Is this a problem that we have seen before? And this is actually the overarching determining factor which has really driven human history. If we look at some of the texts that have been written, sort of historical surveys, and I'll start off with this this book here, if I can just get my screen here. These two books, one is Topsoil and Civilization, written by Vernon Gill Carter and Tom Dale. This was first published in the 1950s. I think that they went on to do a second edition in the 70s, and then there have been a number of texts that have sort of covered the same topic. And then Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, How Societies Choose to Fail to Succeed, covers some of the same material. And what they've done is they've looked at sort of the overriding modes of failure for past civilizations. And interestingly enough, the top three most common modes of failure has been deforestation and habitat destruction, soil problems, which would include soil erosion, salinization, or the salting of soils, and soil fertility losses, and then also water management problems. Now, what's interesting about the way these three problems are presented in the list is that they're sort of listed as three different problems. The fact of the matter is that these are really the same problem. These are actually sort of the logical progression of the one that came before it. So when you deforest an area, when you remove the vegetation from a particular portion of ground, what you've done is you've taken away the organic matter that makes soil. And soil is really seen as being really the basis for civilization to even be able to exist, because it's from soil that you're actually able to, again, grow the things or produce the things which facilitates your ability to live. But when you again look at the sort of the domino effect of what happens when you remove the vegetation and then your ability to create soil, is that it also corresponds to an inability to be able to store water. So if we look at the data related to what it means in terms of your ability to actually have water, accessible water, a reliable source of water, we'll take a look at this screen. Basically, there's been research to suggest, and this has been sort of repeated in a number of different by a number of different researchers, that for every 1% loss in soil organic matter in a given soil, it represents the ability to store somewhere on the order of 168,000 liters of water per hectare. So quite a bit of the research has suggested that we've lost on average about 3% of soil organic matter in at least most agricultural soils, which means that for every hectare of land, we've lost the ability to store over 500,000 liters of water per hectare. Now, when you consider how much land is currently degraded, then you start being able to piece together sort of the size and the scale of the problem. If we look at the current the current amount of degraded land that has been accounted for, we're now looking at approximately 2 billion hectares of degraded land globally. There are only about 5 billion hectares of arable land on the planet, so we're looking at roughly 40% of the arable landmass on Earth that is currently classified as being desertified or as desertifying or as heavily degraded. Now this ends up sort of creating a situation, of course, that we're now able to see occurring in the world. We know that there's somewhere on the order of 60 to 65 million refugees currently on the move around the planet. A lot of it has to do with the conflicts we're seeing in the Middle East and North Africa, which are some of the areas that are experiencing the most severe degradation and problems with food and water security. So this is, it's not difficult to understand why particular circumstance exists in that area, is because these are the arid, degraded, dry climates and landscapes of the planet. So excuse me. So what this means for us is, especially given the fact that we're losing literally millions of hectares of land per year, is we need to figure out whether or not this is something that we can stop. Because at least historically, when we had problems with degraded landscapes and populations of people that were on the move as a result of no longer having stable landscapes to operate in, they had somewhere else to go. The problem now is that we have this condition that's basically happening everywhere at the same time in a much more accelerated manner with many more people and an increasingly more unpredictable pattern of climate globally. And so now there's nowhere left to go. So really the only option we have is to try to take those areas of the earth that are currently in a degraded or desertifying condition and try to actually remediate those places. So thankfully, we do have evidence of this in fact being a possibility, that we can remediate landscapes. It can happen on a large scale, and this is something that we actually should engage in post haste in an effort to try to stave off really seeing the current crisis that we see, mostly in the Middle East and North Africa, having that sort of metastasize at an ever-increasing rate that makes it very hard to recover from. So the example I wanted to refer to is actually from China, and it's something called the Loess Plateau Watershed Rehabilitation Project, which is really probably the best large-scale example that we have to refer to. And here we have some of the numbers that I'd like to show. And this project was actually funded by the World Bank International Development Agency, or the Rural Development Agency. It was started somewhere in the mid-90s, and the funding went through to the mid-2000s. And so between, in those 10 years, they remediated an area of approximately 35,000 square kilometers. That's 3.5 million hectares. It's approximately the size of Belgium or the Netherlands. Actually, I believe it's Belgium. And in that time, they were able to take 2.5 million people out of poverty. The rate of poverty in these four poorest regions of China was somewhere in around 59 or 60%. In 10 years, they were able to reduce the rate of poverty from 59% to 27%. And they tripled the incomes of the farmers in these regions that they were able to remediate the landscapes. And if you take a look at the investment per unit area, that over 10 years, given this investment of $500 million, that breaks down to an investment per hectare of approximately $143 per hectare. That's $14 and about 29 cents per year, right, per hectare per year. And so for that money, they took 2.5 million people out of poverty and tripled the incomes to the farmers in these regions, and cut again and more than half the rate of poverty in these areas. And you can see some of the work that was done. There was massive terraforming to help better manage the water that was showing up in these areas, to hang on to the precipitation. And these were areas that were experiencing major problems with famine, with drought, the drought and flood cycles, problems with dust storms, problems with the silting of the Yellow River, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can see what came from the establishment of this this working of the land. So not only did they do the terraforming and sort of the soil conditioning, reestablishment of climate-appropriate vegetation. Part of what was done here also was to also better manage the livestock in the area. They didn't allow for the livestock in these regions to just sort of graze without being well managed, and that proved to be one of the other major elements which provided for the opportunity to have success, was just really looking at much more intelligent management of these landscapes. Something that I think we are certainly lacking for. I'm sorry. We're certainly lacking for in a great deal of what we're doing now, is that we're just not doing things intelligently. So really, you know, what we propose is sort of an investment in the intelligent management of landscape to remediate these enormous areas, which can be brought back. There are more than enough examples to point to. The problem is that because of the way, as I think as Stephen was talking about, the way that we tend to think about capital, that we only look at capital in terms of sort of financial assets, and everything is sort of seen as being a proxy for financial assets, that we are essentially shooting ourselves in the foot with a very sort of distorted view of how we see the world. And that is resulting in really imperiling ourselves, because we are sacrificing what is arguably the most important capital that we have available to us, and that's natural capital. We're sacrificing that for the sake of creating financial capital, which is really, you know, at the end of the day, it's not real. I mean, you know, money doesn't have an intrinsic value. The only reason why, you know, we sort of we've agreed upon the value of $1 or you know, a pound, or you know, the price of gold or whatever it is. Well, actually, gold might be a bad example, but in terms of, you know, fiat currency, I mean, these are things that really don't have any intrinsic value. At the end of the day, once we run out of land, once we run out of the natural resources that life actually needs in order to exist, once those things are gone, you know, it may be too late for us to finally discover that actually the things that we've sacrificed nature for, in fact, it doesn't really do us any good. So I think, you know, I think as Stephen was mentioning in his opening remarks, if we can allow ourselves to function or to be motivated by a sort of enlightened self-interest, and this enlightened self-interest is really doing things not for the sake of the earth necessarily, and not for the sake of saving nature. I mean, really, the move to try to save nature is really the move to try to save ourselves. And it's understanding that we are not separate from it. We are part and parcel of it. And I'd like to think that this animal that we are with our big brains, we're able to utilize this intelligence in a much more beneficial way that actually does us a lot of good. And so really this is something that I'm hoping we're able to interest more people in. And the fact that we can see that in terms of an investment opportunity, and this is something that actually has been investigated in depth by people like the United Nations Environment Program and the United Nations Development Program. They've actually done a whole survey looking at the restoration of landscapes as a very intelligent way of investing money. But I mean, this is something that, of course, I think this is more of Tim's area of expertise, and maybe I'll just use that as a segue to hand the program over off to Tim, and hopefully we can enter into a discussion afterwards. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to hearing Tim's remarks. So take it away, Tim.
Am I on? No. Yes, it should be on. Hello, Ramis. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the great challenge that we are facing in dealing with land management issues and such. And thank you, Stephen, and all for letting me come in and offer some challenges. I am a tax attorney by training. I spent 30 years of a professional career in the business of putting deals together, not always working sort of with Wall Street, but very much on the edge of Wall Street. And I think that the point that Ramis made that maybe is a good one for us to start with is this concept of finance as financialization of assets, or financialization of business into assets. And my work that I'm doing is with a group called Evergreen Core, and we are trying to introduce into the change-making community people like ourselves who have some values that are not being valued the way they need to be, to talk about this concept we call evergreen superfiduciaries. And as I try to talk to the values-driven community and introduce them to this new way of thinking about what we can do with finance, I find a very common experience that people who value these values are afraid of finance. They're terrified by it. And when I try to engage in a conversation, a lot of times it goes very quiet. And I'm hoping that this group can be part of a movement to change that. And I think the problem is, if you're dealing with finance as the financialization of assets, the truth is that system doesn't value the values that we all believe need to be valued. And a lot of folks are out there trying to insert new values into that existing system. I'm offering a different challenge. I'm saying, what if we build a different system? And the foundations of that system already exist, and they exist in a new kind of financial actor that has become extremely important in the global economy, largely through the Wall Street system over the last 40 years, and that's our pension industry. Most importantly, the pension industry, but also very strategically important, although not as large, are university endowments, which I know in the U.S., where I enter this conversation from, are significant, and also charitable foundations, endowed foundations. And these are all organizations that have fiduciary responsibilities over a shared financial future, and they are individually and collectively become so large that they are effectively also fiduciaries for our shared physical future. And that's why I'm trying to start introducing them into the conversation as super fiduciaries. They're big fiduciaries. They have big powers and they have big responsibilities. And what I'm trying to argue is that we have these enormously powerful, values-friendly financial actors trapped inside this asset model, where all they're doing is moving money around trading transactions and getting charged with a fee for every turn. And what we've got here is a different opportunity, because what these groups need, these super fiduciaries need, is to generate constant cash flows. Because they always have to write checks. They have to write their pension checks. They have to write their checks to support the university. They have to support the missions that they're founded for. So they're very cash flow oriented. And they need to be generating these cash flows, and they need to be regenerating them forever, which means they're not really chasing growth. And yet we've got them trapped in a trading system which is designed to work on growth. And as I listen to Ramis talk about soil degradation and land reclamation, I think that's an excellent example of where we are now as a global economy, that growth cannot be the overriding factor. We're talking about a very important need to simply maintain and sustain. And I think prosperity generates cash flows. The life, to Stephen's points about being a businessman, the business of business is to generate cash flow. And there are lots of ways you can generate cash flow. Not all of them are inconsistent with sustainable values and good community relations and the values that we value. But if you're chasing after an ever-increasing share price, it gets increasingly difficult to maintain those long-term sustainability values when you're accountable for growth overall. And so that's the sort of the evergreen strategy is, and I take this from my own training in real estate and tax, where we did partnership transactions, where we did get into negotiated agreements and work out cash flow sharing. And I think that is a model that the values community, that the change-making community will like to learn more about when you also team that up with these actors, these super fiduciary actors who can invest in these cash flows. And then the question becomes, well, how do we generate the kinds of cash flows from land reclamation activities, for example, that can sustain our retirement system as well as our food system? And one of the things that I think we need to do is start moving out of silos. And for example, the story I want to share with you is some work that I'm involved with looking at renewable energy. I've been in renewable energy as a professional financing these transactions for 10 to 12 years now. And one of the more promising and less developed opportunities is with geothermal heat mining. And the challenge that I want to put out is a project that we're working on to see if we can't get the coal industry, particularly here in the U.S. and the Appalachian mountain areas, West Virginia, Kentucky, where these coal mining communities, very dependent on that one industry that is really dependent on coal combustion for power generation, are struggling. What if we help them transition from coal mining and coal combustion for power generation to digging wells deep into the earth where there are existing reservoirs of very hot rock and pumping water down there and using that hot rock on the ground to create the steam that we generate electricity from? So that now we're mining heat from the ground instead of mining coal from the ground, but we're still generating electricity that powers the economy. And you get Appalachia now being a net exporter of power into the heartland of America and out onto the eastern seaboard where there are these big population centers. This is very clean power. It's very environmentally benign power that can be generated, and it's community regenerating. You can't do this using the Wall Street system of finance because we're talking about simply maintaining cash flows and changing the technology that's used to generate those cash flows. There isn't really a growth story here unless you artificially create one by destroying coal and building up regenerative new energy transactions. But if we begin to think about super fiduciaries as the funding source and tapping into their roles as stewards of our financial and our physical future, can we put a plan in place that involves them providing the financing to wind down our coal mining activities while we wind up our geothermal heat mining activities to sustain a high level of energy, but is also sustaining the planet and the economy in our communities? One of the features of this is it takes a small amount of land to actually install one of these geothermal mining operations, but a large amount of land to collect the heat from. And so it's a natural conservation strategy. And we can take large amounts of land out of into conservation, and really the cost of that can be charged to the cost of providing energy to the economy. So this is one idea that I'd like to start putting out into the conversation with the change-making community to help people start thinking about finance a little bit different, well, quite a bit differently, and to recognize that there are new structures that can be developed, that are being developed, that can be very valuable to things, very friendly to the kind of values we're talking about. And we can look at different ways of putting land reclamation and land conservation into other activities that are cash flow generating and support them in that fashion. And so maybe, Stephen, would there be questions that we could open up to? Or
Tim, thank you. That was very inspiring and quite insightful. I thought we'd just open up to the four of us who've been talking.
Yeah.
For reflections from people who've been listening, and from comments that have been coming up in the chat on the Changemakers page. And Fabiola's been reading those. So maybe, Fabiola, you could tell us some of the reactions that we've been getting while we've been talking.
Thank you. That was very inspiring and quite insightful. I thought we'd just open up to the four of us who've been talking.
Yeah.
For reflections from people who've been listening, and from comments that have been coming up in the chat on the Change.
Hello, can you hear me?
Fabiola, yes.
Those. So
All right.
Fabiola, you could tell us some
a
of
bit
the
of echo somewhere.
reactions that
But
we've been
yes,
getting.
we had a comment from Anna. She was saying that all of these problems are related to our food choices, meat consumption especially, and that is one of the most direct ways we can influence our environment and state of the planet. And then we have a response to that from Ramis, actually. He said meat consumption in and of itself isn't the problem. The way that it's produced is the issue. Same for annual crops. And we have, one of the comments I was also making in the chat myself is, this
sorry,
makes so much
Stephen,
sense.
can someone mute their...
We can influence our environment, and that's better now, I think. All of this making so much sense. One wonders why this isn't so much out there yet. So that's what we've got so far.
Well, one of the big problems is that a lot of these issues that are connected to land degradation and the things which are done which actually result in land degradation is that a great deal of these activities are unfortunately subsidized. So, for example, if you look at the chart that I had put up before about sort of land degradation globally, what are the causes? What are the means by which land is degraded globally? Well, if you look at the causes according to continent, you'll see here, okay, North America, Central America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Oceania, and the world in general. Well, if you go to a continent like North America, I mean, most of the land degradation in North America is actually caused by agriculture. If you look at the degradation that is caused, the primary modes of land degradation in Europe, it's agriculture, improper grazing, and deforestation, or the overexploitation of fuel woods. So, you know, that's a land management issue. That's really, I mean, effectively, what we're looking at is there's a need to change a problematic behavior. So it's not a problem of technology. Technology is just a tool, right? The tool is something that sort of gives birth to or facilitates a particular behavior. And so the way that we go about managing landscape, the way that we go about producing food, you know, you mentioned the comment before about meat. I mean, the meat in and of itself is not the problem, because the fact of the matter is, if you look at the numbers of animals that we're looking at now on the planet, we actually have less animals than we had, you know, in the, say, 300, 400, 500 years ago, when we still had megaherds. If you look at we had megaherds, you know, say pre-European settlement in the Americas. If you look at Africa, Africa had megaherds, And it was actually by means of these animals being pushed across these huge landscapes that actually created the fertile soils that later on were used to establish agriculture in a lot of these places. And then the funny thing is, you usually don't see this problem of degradation, of land degradation, manifest until you see this behavior kind of disrupted. And then once you establish like this large-scale monocropping of things like annual crops, they just see the degradation take place at a much more accelerated rate. And you know, one of the points that had been made at the Co-Forum during the week of the Co-Forum Dialogue on Land Security, and Luke Makaja, the former executive secretary of the Convention to Combat Desertification, had made the comment several times, you know, on a number of occasions. Human beings are the only desert-producing species on the planet. We're the only desert-producing animal on the planet, and the way that we produced deserts has actually been agriculture. You know, ironically enough, and so, you know, so this has been sort of a 7,000-year sort of phenomenon. If you know, if we look at sort of from the start of the Neolithic Revolution up to now, this is really where we see this, you know, this particular phenomenon has really taken, you know, taken a much more hasty pace.
Thanks, Ramis. A wonderful question from Pinaki. Do you think peace can take a backstage when livelihood and other complex issues are present in society? You know, like, human beings are amazing because we're like alligators. You know, like alligators can be so fierce, and they can, with their great big mouth, and they can just bite through anything. And yet, at the same time, if you watch the way alligators take care of their young, is that so tenderly they open their mouths and they let their young jump into their mouths. Human beings, we have both. When we feel threatened, we're like anything else. We have that in us. We have this fight or flight thing. It's in our body. If we feel worried, then obviously we can get really aggressive. If we don't feel worried, then suddenly it's like anything else, you know, like if we feel that we've got all we need, human beings are terribly generous. When we don't feel we've got all we need, then we tend to try and keep back because we feel that we have to keep something back because we don't have enough. And this is a question of culture. Because, like, to me, you know, culture's everything. Culture's about the way I think, about the way I dress, the way I talk, but it's also about my institutions, the way I handle soil, the way I handle animals, the technology I use, and everything. And it's as if we've created a culture that isn't focused on peace. If we were to focus on telling everyone, if we were to focus on not telling everyone, but focus on creating, as I said earlier, a house which was conducive to peace, if we invested in that, then peace wouldn't take a backstage. The moment the basics are fixed, the moment the basics are fixed, we're wonderful people. We all are really, really wonderful. But when we're worried and when we have to take care of our families, then we're focused, we're only thinking about the people closest to us, we're goal-minded, and off we go. So Rishabh wanted to comment that as well.
Yeah, thanks for a really, really enriching input and discussion, and I'm really, really grateful for beginning this adventure with all of you, and I think it's going to go miles ahead, you know, with the venture and hopefully raising investment and for different ventures. I just wanted to comment a bit about my experience in working in Somalia with Hassan, who's sitting right next to me. Was that for us, I think it was not only technical, and I think this is where initiatives of change is so important. Even the work right now we are doing in Kenya in the Baringo community, a lot of the work is how we as human beings are relearning this new culture that actually cooperation is better than competition. And that we as human beings, just to realize that okay, maybe our forefathers have fought with each other, they didn't get along, but today if we can cooperate, if we can work together for the love of tomorrow, we do have the possibility to restore both ecological and social systems. And I wonder if, Hassan, you want to say anything from your experience of working in Somalia, wherein initially, of course, the conflict was not seen as an environmental conflict. Maybe it was seen more of a clan-based issue. But now, as you are learning that it is more and more about food security and environment and things like that.
Yeah, actually, it started with our behavior in Somalia, because once we have been a country, everybody was 80% of the population was farmers, and then we adopted a system which we don't understand, which was communism. And then the government has changed the policy and they confiscated the land into the government institutions, and then we lost all those farmers, and all the farmers, they come to the cities, and then the only food we had is WFB food, which were coming to us. And then slowly the land degradation came, and then the animals, Somalia has the most Somali exports was animal, and slowly the animal has eaten up everything. And land management, we lost the land management, we lost the rainfall, and what else? It's we become an semi,
nomad.
No. I mean, there's no trees, no life.
Desert.
The desert.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in my experience, we cannot have peace without land management. We have to restore the land to get the peace. That goes hand in hand. And Ramis, you know that. You have been in Somalia, and you have been even worse areas. So I'm very grateful that that discussion going on is started tonight and continues. And now I'm going to Kenya tomorrow, after tomorrow. So I will be on land and security conference in Kenya. It is very challenging for us.
If I may, I'd like to follow up, on Hassan's point, and I'm so glad he mentioned this. I've been up further north in Somaliland. I've been in Sanag and in Mahir, up in near the Dalo Mountains, near the mountains near Al Sheikh, the Almas Mountains, and I'm over into the Almado Mountains. Hopefully sometime before the end of the year, like heading over into Puntland. And the situation in Somalia is so emblematic of really what you see in so much of that region, how sort of a lot of Africa and the Middle East is sort of turned into something of it's a basket case. These are places that for centuries had been very, very fertile places, very stable places. You know, if you go to a place like, you know, Syria now, Syria, Iraq, and I mean, that's the Fertile Crescent. That's the place where agriculture began. That's where it started. You know, these were really the places where we saw the development of civilization actually occur. Actually, far you know, much earlier than what we saw in Europe and what we now know of America. I mean, so the question is, how did those places come that way? How did they become basket cases? And I think, you know, the example from Somalia, which again at first it was presented as some sort of you know, clan conflict, and the person that I first heard that this was a really mistaken understanding of the situation was from the Somali novelist Nuruddin Farah, and he said that and unfortunately he said a lot of Somalis have bought into that narrative. And he said, actually, the problem is it's an issue that has long been an issue in that part of, and he said right now it's between people that were sort of nomadic or semi-nomadic, and they still were like kind of pastoralists, and people that became urban city dwellers. And ultimately, it was a conflict over land use. And as the land became less productive and less stable and less fertile and able to again produce the things that people needed in order to live, that's when the conflict started. And then it just accelerated. It became that much worse actually when we saw the sort of international financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank started to implement things like the structural adjustment program. And really this was, you know, starting back probably in the I guess in the 70s. And then once the structural adjustment program was put into place, it caused the Somali economy to basically dive, just to nosedive. The currency collapsed because they're now importing things that were artificially cheap. It basically killed any sort of local production, any sort of local agriculture. It just rendered it, just killed it on, you know, killed it dead, because since they couldn't compete with the prices of the artificially cheap imports, there was no motivation to produce anything. So the situation that we see there now was manufactured by outside forces. Probably, you know, maybe I'd like to think that they had good intentions, but we see the result, and unfortunately, we've seen the same sort of mechanism at work in so many parts of the world that have resulted in very similar outcomes as we've seen in Somalia. So again, this is something that we need to take note of, and that ultimately the way that place and many other similar areas of the world which are experiencing the same kinds of troubles, the way that those places are brought back is if you actually remediate the landscapes. You put the focus and the investment into bringing back the functional integrity of the landscape so that people are able to actually create a life for themselves.
Great. So thank you, everyone. We've gone a little bit over time, but I think this is just the beginning, and I hope that we will maybe also take more cases in the next webinar of how we can support things in Somalia, things in Syria, and also maybe explore more with Tim now that there is a lot of disinvestment from fossil fuels for different pension funds all over the world. I would love to get in, for example, the people who are working in the disinvestment campaign here in Sweden with some of the pension funds and banks. What is their strategy? Where are they investing their money now? Which creates, you know, returns, but also sequesters CO2 and creates livelihood. Yeah, is there, Stephen, would you like to share any closing comments or anything before we close?
Hi. Yeah, well, thank you for making this happen. Thank you, Fabiola, for looking after us technically. I think it's been a great conversation. I think it's not going to end here. I think this is, if anything, the start of the beginning. And I really would look forward to carrying on the conversation and also seeing if we can do anything practical at any of the levels I pointed out. So I'm open to suggestions, and we have a conversation that's open on Facebook where we can continue to share inspiration and perspective. And I think also the Changemaker platform here has a chat as well. And there might be something else, Rishabh, is there? To keep in touch and keep the conversation going?
Yes, also in this summer in our center in Co, there are two big conferences, one called Land, Lives, Peace. I think Ramiz mentioned Co, where we will be doing another workshop, a physical workshop with Stephen and myself on the same issue, but also we will be exploring this in the Trust and Integrity Global Economy Conference, also in Co. But hopefully also we might do other things in Sweden. But yeah, for now the Facebook page, the Changemakers platform, is what we can do to use to exchange ideas and feedback, and ideas for the next webinar for what we can do together. Great.
Fine. So you know where we are. If you know anyone or would like to have anything on the program, let us know. We'll see what we can do.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Ramesh. Thanks, Fabi.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
All right, looking forward to talking to you guys again.